Imagine working for over a decade at one of the biggest tech giants, seeing firsthand how digital commerce was getting more complex, and thinking there has to be a better way. Most people might just complain, but our guest today, he built the solution. He's a serial entrepreneur, a tech startup CEO, and a proud restaurant owner. By day, he is revolutionizing how brands manage e-commerce with AI-powered merchandising at Synthesium AI. By night, you might just find him brewing up the best matcha in Massachusetts at Kushala's Sip Coffee House, the cafe he co-owns with his wife. So, how does one juggles tech, AI, and coffee? And what lessons can we learn from his journey? Welcome to another episode of our Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build, launch, and grow your business. In this episode, we talk to Vinod, the founder of Synthesium. Vinod, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ash. Happy to be here.
Great. Do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires or motivates you, you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah. But before I do that, can I just say that was one of the best intros I've gotten in a long time. Maybe I can pay you to do my intros for my sales calls. That work? Um, from a code perspective, I'm not a big code person, but I read something I literally, this was a message on Slack this morning as I was working with my broader network. And someone said, scaling a business is basically scaling relationships.
Mm,
And that struck a chord. I thought that was so true that business is just about relationships at the end of the day, relationships over revenue, as I like to say it. So scaling business is basically about scaling relationships, and that I think is probably quote for the year for me.
couldn't agree more on this one, Vinod, because I mean, I'm myself into a SaaS startup, which is basically building communities. And I learned hard way, to be honest, that building relationship with 10 people could get you more value than just throwing around on social media and having 1,000 followers. It's the crux, right? Great. So tell us more about Synthium, sorry. What does the product do? Who is it for? And what's the main problem you're helping to solve?
Cynthium is as we'd like to call it, an agentic merchandising engine. By that, what we mean is fundamentally we are trying to solve the problem of reducing merchandising complexity for teams that run e-commerce businesses. That's what we do. E-commerce or digital commerce, however you want to call it, especially with larger brands, especially with brands that are clocking more than 10 million a year,
Mhm.
um, the scale and complexity has changed dramatically in the last 24 months. There was this post-COVID high when anybody and everybody was starting to an e-commerce business. And large established brands started to throw money at the problem in trying to scale what they saw was a once in a lifetime opportunity to really grow their business in the immediate post COVID era when shopping behavior changed completely and we all went digital from buying milk to groceries to everything else. And unfortunately, what was happening, which we only know in hindsight today, what was actually happening was that our behavior as shoppers wasn't really changing as much as it was temporarily shifting to a different thing just to adjust with the changing times.
Hmm.
So what happened was instead of e-commerce suddenly going from 15% growth every year to 40, 45, 50% growth every year, what was actually happening was future growth was getting pulled forward.
Hmm.
What the e-commerce brands would have experienced as growth 3, 4, 5 years down the line, they all got pulled forward and compressed within a 24-month time frame.
Hmm.
All of us mistook the growth to be an indicator of a permanent change in how we will shop online.
Hmm.
But it turned out to be temporary. So, what happened? After 2022, when we all, as a society, we started to change the way we lived our lives. We started to go back into the world, into the real world. We started going back to restaurants. We started to grocery shop at real supermarkets. Digital growth softened.
Hmm.
But when that happened, all these millions of dollars were already invested in e-commerce technology, that e-commerce teams were suddenly faced with this giant morass of point solutions that just
Hmm.
complicated how commerce was being run, how commerce was being managed. So suddenly, 2023 hits, and most e-commerce businesses are slowing down. The complexity is just enormously more than what it was just a couple of years ago. It required a lot more people to run the business, but the growth was slowing, so there was no budget to hire more people.
Hmm.
So most brands were stuck in this untenable situation where growing required people, but growth wasn't happening, and they couldn't get more people. And then 2024, we all thought things would get easier, but didn't. Cost to acquire customers started to increase.
Hmm.
All the technology that was invested, everybody was locked into existing vendors.
Hmm.
So now in 2024, not only growth started to soften, but margin pressure started to increase. So even when top line revenue was increasing, people were not actually making as much money. There was not much cash left in the bank. So there
Hmm.
wasn't much money to reinvest in growing the business further. So again, for 24 months, the last 24 months, most direct to consumer businesses, most e commerce digital businesses have been stuck in this very unforgiving situation, that as an individual who's been fortunate enough to have a front row seats to this industry's growth, I found this very frustrating.
Hmm.
Most of my relationships are working in this industry. Most of my friends, most of my acquaintances are in this industry. So me and a handful of people got together and we figured out a way to solve this problem. Around this time is when ChatGPT was getting into the zeitgeist, and we were all thinking about how AI is going to solve many of these challenges that we were facing. We realized that we can actually deploy AI to reduce complexity of running the business and therefore help commerce brands regain some of the margins that they have lost in
Hmm.
the previous few years. So, connecting this back to what is Synthium AI, at the end of the day, we are trying to get brands increase their gross margin. And we do that by simplifying their internal operational workflow so that they can increase their catalog size without having to increase the team size. So that the same group of people can accommodate more higher value function,
Hmm.
and AI can offload all the grunt work off their shoulders. And this way, we are helping e-commerce brands essentially get back to growth by deploying very simple tools that 10x reduces their internal operational complexity.
Hmm. This is very interesting because this this has been in the market since from the beginning of dawn. I think so. When there are, you know, a green revolution about the agriculture, then the industrial revolution, and every single revolution we had, there was either a technology or a way doing how to do that work could have improved that particular part of the process and returned quite a lot of, you know, substantial amount of either effort or capital, but you know, whichever way we want to go. But this is very interesting because you mentioned that in last 24, not last 20, 23 to till 2025, the growth hasn't been that much. Would you be able to share with our audience what is the current growth in e-commerce industry in 2025?
This year,
Yeah.
these first couple of months, still been soft,
Hmm.
single digits. So most
Single digit.
brands, especially the larger brands, are
Hmm.
seeing anywhere between, on an average, 7, 8, 9% growth.
Hmm.
Uh, there's a difference between margin growth and revenue growth. Revenue growth is still about 15%, in the 15% range, but margin growth is starting to soften. At the end of 2024, if you look at publicly available data and case studies from direct to consumer brands like Warby Parker and others, and Glossier and others, um, gross margin is starting to become single digits,
Hmm.
less than 10%. So 8, 7, 6. Once it hits 4%, then game over. There's really not a lot you can do to invest back in the business.
Mm.
Uh, Revenue growth is still about 15%, 15, 18%.
Got it. Got it. Okay, great. Cool. So let's move back to the founder's journey here. And I know I'm looking forward to speak with you about the coffee shop, but let's take it at the next part of the question. But the usual one, the usual culprit, which I usually ask with my guests, is about how did you got your first customer?
Relationships,
Mm,
one word. So before starting Cynthium, most of the founding team, me, my co-founder, and the founding team, to a large part, we all are ex Salesforce, former Salesforce employees, and I spent 12 years in that organization before starting this company. And in that organization, I was I spent 12 years, which were kind of equally split between product management, product development, and professional services, customer success. So part of it was building the product. The other part of it was helping customers really use the product to be successful to attaining their business goals.
mm,
All of this was not in the CRM space, but in the e-commerce space. So over those 12 years, I was lucky enough to work with some really marquee brands. If you look at the customer list that Salesforce has, like, footwear and apparel, for example, New Balance and Puma, Nike, and in cosmetics, L'Oreal, and luxury fashion, Louis Vuitton. So all these amazing marquee brands that work in Salesforce, I was fortunate enough to be involved in some shape or form
mm.
in helping these brands adopt digital commerce technology and helping them establish their brands online, grow their brands online, grow their businesses online. So it was a series of relationship building exercise,
Mm-hmm.
and I was fortunate enough to be able to carry those relationships over, and that's how I got my first customer. By relationships, what I actually mean is this: the establishment of trust
Mm,
between individuals, where irrespective of what organization they work with and what organization I am working with, that we both have some sense of trust in each other. As in, if I say something, I will do it, and if that
mm.
person says something, I trust that they will do it, and some moment of trust and accountability. And that helped get Cynthium AI's first customer when we started this company.
Cool, cool, cool. And I want to jump into the next one, which is like, how did you got your first 10? But before that, I want to mention two things. You mentioned you had Nike and all these brands, working with it. Did you manage to get some freebies from them?
Well, um, those will be saved for a conversation over beer.
Okay.
Uh, However, many of these brands actually have very good employee stores.
Hmm.
Most of these brands' headquarters have a store for their employees or a flagship store that is used to test a few things. Like if there's a new product and you're trying to figure out how to merchandise that product in the store, you don't
Hmm.
want to go do that in public. You want to have a store that you control 100%, and hopefully your employees and your leadership team can go to actually have a point of view on how these products are being merchandised.
Hmm.
So many of them have a store like on the same premise so that they can do these things, and employee stores. So when we get to visit these brands, they many of them are generous enough to allow us to peruse the employee stores and peruse the employee discounts when we visit them in their headquarters. So
Awesome.
that is yeah. So that happens.
That is perfect. I still remember I went to Rolls office, and then I got to get this uh, souvenir of an engine, uh, you know, because they manufacture jet engines. So there you go. Although I ended up working with them for a while later on, but that was a good experience for me, when I
Uh-huh.
was visiting. So moving on to the next one. I recently got to know from my partner that LV is jumping into cosmetic. Is that correct? Or
Who is?
Louis Vuitton?
Maybe. I'm not surprised. But such a huge conglomerate because
Yeah.
they are everywhere. They are LVMH is doing so many things. Well, Moet Hennessy being um, conglomerate of brands in itself, I'm not surprised that they'd be jumping into cosmetics.
You
Speaks to the
might want
market segment.
you might want to reach out to them soon.
Yeah, yeah. Let me write that down.
Yeah. Great. So before getting into the next question, like, how did you got your first time customer? What I want to know is I want to know more you as a person. Can you take us back to your roots, share with our listeners about your upbringing, your childhood? How did your early experiences shaped your journey? And, did you had this situation like a rich dad and poor dad, in the book, as it explained? Did you had a friend? Did you had a friend's dad? Did you had a character around your childhood who motivated you to do what you're doing right now? How was it? And what we would love to hear about the foundation that sets you on this incredible path.
That is such an interesting question. I rarely get this one. Um, so I was born in India. I grew up in India. I I was in India for the first 25 years of my life.
Hmm.
So obviously, India is a big part of shaping me as a person and part of my journey.
Mm.
My family, most of them are based in the south,
Hmm.
in the city of Chennai. And my father was working for the National Television Service, which was a nationalized service back in the 70s and 80s.
Hmm.
So he used to get like shipped from one city to next because back then and even now, if you work in any of the governmental functions, you get deployed to different cities based on where there's need for people with your expertise.
Mm.
So we used to go along. So I spent a few years in Bangalore. I've spent a few years in Delhi, and a couple of other places. Point being, throughout my school, primary, middle, and high school, um, I moved around to
Mm.
different cities. And what that meant was I had to learn different languages. As you know, state to state, languages are different. I had to learn different cultures and customs. And I think that influenced the you know diversity oriented upbringing that I had, having
Mm.
seen so many variations of how people live and what their values are and how life moves at different speeds in different parts of the country depending on where you are, living away from immediate family for a long time and things like that. So it sort of brought in a mentality of flowing with the way things are flowing. You
Mm.
know, as Bruce Lee said, "Be water, my friends." So that has been a big part of what what was incorporated into me since the beginning. It also
Mm.
exposed me a lot of things that shaped my belief system and my perception of what I should be aiming for in the future. So I wasn't really stuck to one city, one town, one circle of friends, or one circle of people. As we moved from city to city, I was exposed to different things, and
Mm.
so I could see a broader set of. I'd like to think that I was able to see a broader set of possibilities of what I could do. Uh, by high school, I was already interested in computers. I don't know why. There's no origin story here. It's just like a natural, very instinctive, very visceral thing. that I
You
felt.
haven't seen the Pentium 4 on a tuk-tuk or something like that, or a bicycle.
No. Yeah, I don't have these stories about how as an 8-year old I used to play with assembling computers. No, that I didn't do that. I was
Mm,
we had a very modest upbringing um, in the 80s and 90s of India. Um, we didn't have television until I was like 12 years old, 13 years old, right? It's unimaginable today, but that was the reality of what it was back then.
yeah.
Forget smartphones, no TV. Um, so by the time I got to high school, I was already keen on learning computer science. Took classes, learned programming. Pascal was the first ever language I learned. I
Mm,
was hooked. It was fascinating, and I passed instructions to a machine. And the machine does stuff for you.
there you
Super
go.
cool to see. So went to college, studied computer science in college. Started working for a startup. Actually, started working for Citibank,
Mm,
doing system admin work. Um, these bank data centers where people are like hunkering
crunching
down with
numbers. Yeah.
big servers doing backup and recovery.
Mm,
Tape backups and disk backups. I was one of the guys doing that.
yeah.
And
Did
the
you say
most
Citibank?
yes, yes,
Yeah, Citi.
the most
Citi was
interesting
a startup that time. Yeah.
well, and and the most interesting part of that was Y2K. So I
Yeah.
was in the bank data center on the New Year's Eve on midnight, December 31st. Um, where as Y2K was passing, fingers crossed, having installed all the patches, waiting to see if things would blow. But nothing happened, as you know.
Mm,
Then I joined some startups, grew my network there, and eventually realized um, that I wanted to see if I could really take a crack at starting my own business because I had already had ideas that I wanted to try.
mm,
After a few years of working for different companies, I thought, I've learned computer science. I needed a business grounding to understand aspects of what it means to run a business.
mm.
So I decided to go to B school. Came to the United States at the age of 26. Came to Boston for my MBA. As it turned out, met my wife there. Um, did not know that Boston would be the city I would settle down for the next 20 years. 20 years later, here we are. I'm still in Boston,
Mm.
having started a company and a couple of coffee shops.
There you go.
Gone total entrepreneur mode. So that is the story of my life.
That's so perfect. I mean, I have a special place for Boston in my heart too, because one of my first client was from Boston.
Oh,
Yeah, and my partner recently did her certification from Boston. She loved it. She's a writer, so she said Boston is the best place to be. You know, for biotechnology people and especially people who are learning writing. And now she got accepted in UCL. So there you go. We're looking for
aha,
another Netflix story coming soon. So
ah,
hopefully that will happen. But yeah, so great story. And I think uh, I believe at least 60% people, 60% listeners will relate to your story because most of the time we have this, uh, you know, very decent, childhood. And then suddenly we got into some interesting bits. Either it could be computers or other technological, uh, uh, verticals. And then we pursue our dreams. But it takes really, really long time to jump that threshold from 9 to 5 to, I think, not 9 to 5, it's like 6 to 12, I guess.
probably right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, so going towards that, you run a high tech AI startup and a coffee business, and you just said multiple coffee business. First, how did you open your first coffee business? And then second, how do you manage both without going insane?
Well, my sanity has been questioned, so I don't know if I can safely claim I have not gone insane. Um, but let's talk about how the coffee business started.
Mm.
That's an interesting story. That's actually more interesting than the technology startup.
Oh, perfect.
So when I was doing my 9 to 5, it was an international job. So I traveled quite a bit. In one of those trips, I was going to Germany,
Mm.
and this time my wife wanted to come along. Her work was already remote first. This was back in 2014, 2013, maybe.
Mm.
It was a very remote first, location friendly job, so she could do it from anywhere. So we went to Germany together.
Mm-hmm.
And in Germany, we stayed in Berlin. Actually, no, we stayed in Munich for a little bit. But then we went to this. The work that I had to do was in this small town called Jena. It's a very university-centric town.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a very well-known, renowned technological university. So some tech companies there, but it's a very student-centric town.
Mm.
So we went there. I was there for a week. I did my work. But she was working for a Boston based company. So in Germany, Boston's 9 a.m. doesn't start until Germany's noon. So she had all morning to explore Vienna.
Mm.
And she would do that every single day. She knows more about that town than I ever did in all my travels. So she would walk around and she would tell me these stories about all these different coffee shops that she encountered in her
Mm.
walks, and how the culture of coffee was very different there than what we used to see here back in 2012 or 2013 timeframe. In here, it's changing now, but back then it was a very to-go culture, very fast food culture.
Mm.
Um, uh, Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks were the two main players in this area, at least,
Mm-hmm.
and it was predominantly to go. It was predominantly to take out. So order coffee, step in, grab a paper cup,
Mm.
plastic cup, walk away. But the coffee culture there that we observed was about connecting with people. Coffee was just an excuse.
Mm.
It was about meeting people. It was about catching up. There was no. We did not for. I don't think we ever saw anybody working with their laptop in a coffee shop. Super common here in Boston, but back there, almost nothing.
Mm.
Coffee was always served in proper silverware and china and proper cups. It was always accompanied with something sweet, maybe a dessert of some sort or pastry. It was sort of it had a classical nostalgic sense to it. So we thought if we ever got an opportunity to start a business, we knew that that existed there and didn't here, but we we felt there was a need for that type of an environment, that type of a place for finding connection
Mm.
necessary here. So long story short, at some point during that time, in the middle of a dead winter, this was I think January of 2014, January 2015, dead winter, snow everywhere, super cold. One evening, we decided to get Chinese food, and this is one Chinese food place here that does not deliver. You have to go pick
Mm.
it up from there. So we call, we place an order. I drive. We go. Snow banks on the sidewalks, covered in snow, very little space to like even walk. So I parked the car and I said, she comes with me. So I said, you know what? You wait in the car. Let me go pick up the food. So I parked the car, get off the car, go pick up the food, come back to the car, and she wasn't there. And I was thinking, okay, where'd she go? So I was like walking, looking around. Just in the next block, she was standing in front of what looked like a renovated building with glass pane windows. And she was peering through the glass pane. It was dark. It was like 8 p.m.,
Mm.
pitch dark, peering through the glass to see what was inside. And as I was walking towards her, I saw this big for lease sign on the side of that window. And she turned to me. She excitedly said, "No, this is the place. I think this is the place. We should ask about this."
Mm.
So we called the landlord. We asked about the place, and one thing led to another. We found the right people to get training from to understand how to run a coffee business. found the right roasters, found the right place to source our products. Everything was coming together. We thought this was pretty much all ducks are getting in a row. So we decided to punch the button and start the first business. So we started the first business. A few years later, COVID hit. Luckily, we both were fairly well educated. I'm from the technology industry. By the time COVID hit, we had already digitally transformed a coffee shop. We had already figured out how to have an online ordering system. We were already available on all the marketplaces. Before Uber Eats and Grubhub and all these places were popular, we were already present in those marketplaces.
Mm.
So by the time COVID hit, we became that all that investment, all that effort started to pay off. And people started ordering from us while other businesses were closing. Unfortunately, we saw many of our neighbors close down, but we were fortunate enough to stay open and continue operating the business and serving our community. So that really increased the our growth and our trajectory. And we had the opportunity to then add a second location. So we added a second location. The second location happened to be a much larger space. And it was around the time when many restaurants were closing. So we were lucky enough to get a good, sizable site, and we expanded into food. So beyond coffee. So the second location, a full blown restaurant. The first location is just a coffee shop. I said
Mm.
just a coffee shop, but it's a coffee shop.
Yeah,
So that's where we got to where we are today.
amazing. I love the part when you mentioned about you went to pick up the Chinese and then you came back and she wasn't there. Because it was cold, it was snowy, right? So yeah, great stuff. Um, the conversation is really interesting, Vinod. But as you know, we all have to finish our recording at some point. And I want to cover the lightning round, which is the most interesting part in our interviews. But before we go into that, I would like to hear more about Cynthium AI. What's the step-by-step process if a e-commerce giant want to get onboarded with you guys? And could you share a compelling case study that highlights how a company leveraged Cynthium solution to achieve success and solve their key business challenge? And I would love to hear about a specific problem or specific part of their whole process which you help them automate with AI, and then what were the measurable outcomes they experienced?
Yeah, I think well, let's take those in the reverse order. I think it'll
Okay.
make more sense if we do it
Mhm.
that way. So our first customer is a large public company. We cannot name them because we're not approved for. Because they're a public company, there are so many rules about around how to refer to them in what conversations. So it's a large public company, more than $1 billion in size, international. They sell consumer goods essentially, and their online business is pretty massive, more than $100 million online. It's a public company, so most of the revenue information is available in public.
Mhm.
So as they were trying to navigate their 2023 year, the among all the different challenges that they were experiencing, one of the things that they were finding was on their e-commerce site, on brand.com, the search experience, the search box was not leading to an ideal outcome.
Mm.
As in, it was starting to get very difficult to control and influence what each search term resulted in when a shopper would search for a product.
Mm.
They had products in different colors. Colors is a main driver for them. So when they introduce a new color, the marketing department makes a big deal, sends email marketing campaigns, social media, all that happens. And when a shopper comes on site and searches for the color, they expect to see that product in that color or products in that color show up. Sometimes it would, sometimes it won't.
Mm.
Turned out the number of screens that they had to go through to configure search properly was 18. They had to go through 18 different screens, 18 different tabs to figure out and make sure that this was set up correctly.
Mm.
This is very common, especially with large enterprises. And it's one of those ideal scenarios where a solution like Cynthium can help.
Mm.
So at Cynthium, we saw this as an opportunity to simplify their workflow for them by deploying AI to automate all the stuff that could be automated so that the users, in this case, merchandisers, only have to focus on things that required human intervention, that required human ingenuity, that required human creativity. Right. So we deployed the product on their site. This actually happened in October last year. So by the time November rolled by, and as you know, Thanksgiving to Christmas is the biggest
Yeah.
season of
Season for
shopping in the
sales.
United
Yeah.
States.
Yeah.
So they ran their holiday season on Cynthium, and their search conversion rate, which is the metric we use to measure whether we're doing our job properly or not, their search conversion rate improved double digits.
Mm.
So and more importantly, the people who managed merchandising of this search box felt a lot more confident about their ability to control the outcome.
Mm.
So with AI, there's always this fear and this trade-off that people have to make. Am I offloading everything to the AI engine? Do I have any influence? How do I override the AI engine's output if I disagree with what the engine is doing?
Mm.
I think the cleverness about Cynthium, if I can call it that, is the ability for it to strike the right balance between letting the humans be creative, letting the humans be influential in defining the aesthetics of the site, while letting the AI take on all the grunt work, all the mundane, repetitive things that don't require human creativity and
Mm.
human ingenuity for it to work. So we were able to accomplish that. And beyond just the double digit growth in search conversion rate, I think our biggest accomplishment was seeing the merchandising team feel a lot more confident
Mm.
and a lot more encouraged and motivated to tackle merchandising as a function for this brand.com site. So that's how we help them accomplish that. So from there on, the ability to sort of get Cynthium um, installed or implemented was pretty straightforward. Again, we learned a lot from our experience at Salesforce. Salesforce takes a lot of time and effort to implement and get going. So we figured out a way where someone can actually start using Cynthium in 2 weeks of implementation. The whole thing from signing a contract to starting using Cynthium is a 2 week period.
Mm.
That doesn't mean that the implementation stops, but the because different businesses have different complexities associated with it. We have a process where we can get the brand to start using Cynthium in as little as 2 weeks from contract signing.
Mm.
And then anything additional can happen in parallel while they continue to use the product. So we use this parallelization technique where they start using the product and don't have to wait for months and months and months. And so they get value immediately while we continue to do any other additional customization that needs to happen in a parallel way so that eventually, maybe in a month, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, depending on really how complex their business is, the engine is fully customized and fully aware of how this brand would like to run its business
Mm.
online.
Mm. Interesting. And would you be able to? So before we move towards the lightning round, would you be able to share what kind of technologies you're using, just for the awareness of our listeners? Are you using custom LLM models made for your customers? Are you using APIs from some AI providers? What's the tech stack?
Sure, sure. A large part of the fundamental foundational pieces are running on AWS. Um, our foundational tech stack is not very different. Is Postgres, is React for the application to a large extent, and some Rust thrown in for the API layer. And then for the AI, we have a LangChain based implementation that leverages today. It leverages OpenAI to a large extent, but is continuously being improved to be truly LLM agnostic. So that
Mm-hmm.
as we move into areas where we are basically readying ourselves for a world where when we start working with a brand, the brand already has a preferred LLM vendor.
Mm-hmm.
So if the brand already has a preferred LLM vendor, then we should strive to work
Use that. Yeah.
use that vendor. So for example, if someone prefers Anthropic over OpenAI, we want to be able to then leverage that for Cynthium.
Mm.
So we are working towards that eventuality. So right now, when there's not a lot of established preferential vendors in the market, OpenAI seems to do a good enough job.
Mm.
But we see a future where we have to be open to routing our wiring through a different LLM, being truly multi-substrate from an LLM perspective.
Mm.
We don't build foundational models of our own. That's not the business we are in.
Mm-hmm.
But we do our secret sauce, so to speak, is the embeddings and the vectors that we create and the tokens that we create uh, to be sent to the LLM model,
Mm.
because the embeddings that we create are a true reflection of a brand's internal DNA, so to speak. Like here's an example, right? If you're in a paddle brand, you know that khaki is a color,
Mm.
but khakis with an S can refer to pants or trousers,
Mm. Mm.
right? So when a shopper on the search box is searching for khakis, they may not mean show me multiple khaki colored clothing. They may mean I want
Show
to
me
shop for,
pants. Yeah.
right? So is that's a generic example, but you can imagine how brands can have their own specific variations of that, and that is sort of it's the brand DNA.
Mm.
So our embeddings truly capture that DNA, and that becomes our secret sauce. And because we have that, we are able to then automate a lot of these optimization functions that a brand has to do on their commerce site.
Got it. Got it. That's really interesting. So yeah, I want to ask you one personal question, if you don't mind, before we move to the lightning round, if that's okay. It will take not take more than 1 minute. Is that okay?
All right, sure, let's
Yep.
do it.
So throughout your journey and experience, you must have been like you must have been valuable. There must have been some valuable lessons learned. I'm trying to, if you don't mind sharing, could you reflect on your experience and tell our listeners about a mistake or a setback you came across along the way, and then you might not consider it as a regret, but a lesson learned? And what advice would you want to give our listeners based on that particular experience?
Yeah, yeah. Well, several come to mind, actually. Uh, but mistakes are a part of life. And in a career that has spanned 20 to 25 years, there are more mistakes than I can count. But like you said, every mistake is a learning opportunity. Every mistake is an opportunity to reflect back and see if we can do things to better ourselves. If that were to happen again, would we react the same, or would we react differently? So lessons are those where I determined that I could have reacted differently
Hmm.
and I could have responded to that situation differently. A couple of instances come to mind. It's usually the common thread here is um, working in any job, in any high pressure environment, or running a business is a high pressure environment anyway. Um, Things can get emotionally stressful.
Hmm.
Like physical stress, we are trained to handle. Mental and emotional stress that don't necessarily manifest in any physical form are hard to identify. There are symptoms for that, like burnouts and lack of focus and all that stuff, but sometimes they show up in the way we work with others.
Mm.
So there have been a couple of instances. There's just definitely one where um, I have been uh, sort of emotionally reactive instead of being emotionally stable.
Mm.
Instead of responding to a situation, reacting to the situation. Um, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying that we all have to be emotionally stoic all the time. That doesn't work. However, being able to breathe and take a step back and not react when things get emotionally stressful is something that I've learned. Like, for example, there's this one instance where um, it was a stressful situation, and we actually, not almost, we did end up in a screaming match between two individuals.
Mm.
There was another instance where I was, instead of trying to be collaborative, I started being very prescriptive and sort of borderline judgmental in how the other person should have reacted and responded without
Mm.
taking into consideration that I was reacting and responding in a similar way.
Mm.
So the underlying theme here is emotional and stressful situations are common, and I have learned that taking a step back and sort of ignoring a situation is actually very helpful instead of jumping into it and try to wrestle it down and find a solution right away. Sometimes taking a step back and letting things cool down is a much better way of dealing with emotionally stressful situations than jumping into it right away, trying to solve it immediately.
Mm. Got it. Very interesting because, as founders, we face these challenges all the time, but the perspective we have because of different setbacks or kind of these experiences give us more wider perspective towards the experience. So thanks for sharing that. So I've got six quick fire question for you now,
Okay,
and you can answer them as quickly as you can. You ready?
wait a minute.
There you go.
All right, here we go. Let's do
Let,
this.
let's do it. What are the top three strategies to generate more um, sort of traction for these businesses in 2025 for e-commerce?
Top three strategies: diversify your marketing channel. Don't just go all in on social. Organic and word of mouth is still the best. So build your brand to build organic and word of mouth. And third, loyalty is more important than ever. So if you already have a customer, do everything and anything you can to keep them instead of just focusing on getting new customers.
Got it. What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
What book?
Yeah.
Execution. The book on getting things done, because everybody's got ideas, but ideas don't mean anything if you don't execute them. Execution is a great book, but so is another book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is actually
Mm.
about execution and less about strategy.
Mm.
So that's another book that I've really enjoyed.
Got it. What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful founder?
Emotional stability.
There you go. I was thinking that that will come up.
Being even keel is so important these days, especially
Yeah,
these days.
yeah, yeah. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
ChatGPT.
Mm.
Um, it takes. It's easy to get started. There are 100 ways of doing it wrong, but if you can figure out a way to use it to help your use cases, it can really up level your own internal efficiency, as I have found out for myself.
Perfect. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would love to pursue if you had time?
Crazy ideas are actually old ideas and new again. So I have this crazy idea where every individual entrepreneur, like we see these people starting to make baked goods or soaps and cosmetics in their kitchen,
Hmm.
creating a global network of such entrepreneurs where they all can share customers with each other in a
Hmm.
non-competitive way.
Something like Etsy, you mean?
Yeah, kind of. But Etsy is for gifts. I'm
Mm.
talking an Amazon where every product is being sold by micro, small scale entrepreneurs
Mm.
and not corporations and large brands. Like all sub $1 million businesses.
Got it. Got it. And last but not least, what's an interesting or a fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Most people don't know. Man, I talk to a lot of people. A lot of people know me about a lot of things about me. Uh, most people think, most people are correct in thinking that I'm an introvert by nature. But I can flip to being an extrovert when required. For
Hmm.
example, case in point right now. Um, my definition of this is as an extrovert, you can just jump in and do this. But for someone like me to do this, I practice, I rehearse, I listen to some of your podcasts that you've done with other folks. Phenomenal. Popcorn CRM was one of my favorites, by the way. And I visualize, I practice, I imagine, I try to plan so that when I'm here, when I'm doing this, which is against my default nature,
Hmm.
that it goes smoothly. So a few people looking at this might think that I am an extrovert, but it's just a lot of practice.
Mm. Mm. And I think I can relate to that. Sometimes I just shut up myself and then sit down in a room and look at the walls and not thinking anything. Trust me.
We need to do that to recharge ourselves, right? I do that all the
That-
time. So my wife says this. For me, it's standing in front of the window and gazing
Mm.
outside.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story, unpacking last few years of building this business and some of the ups and downs. If people want to check out Synthetium, what's the best way to do it? And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
LinkedIn. I am. I pretty much spend hours every day on LinkedIn. We Cynthium has a decent enough presence on LinkedIn. We obviously have a website where most of this information I shared is available. There's some more info there. But hit us up on LinkedIn. Me, my co-founder, our larger team, we all are pretty open about talking about these challenges. And even if you don't have to like buy Cynthium, like I said, we all value relationships more than revenue here. So for us, it's about relationship building. So if you reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, including myself, we'd be happy to chat more without any agenda of any sales expectations here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So basically, I would definitely recommend everyone to jump on LinkedIn, search for Vinod Kumar, and then connect with him and bombard him with a lot of e-commerce question so that he can help you out and not charge you any consulting fee. That would be perfect, right? Well, thank you so much, Vinod, for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and the impactful work you're doing with Synthetium and coffee. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Thank you, Ash, for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Great. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Founders Podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Vinod insightful and inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep building.